Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. I thank very much again to the MLFA for inviting me over to America and giving me the chance to meet my brothers and sisters in the Ummah here. And I'd like to say, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's still amazing and very fresh for me, Islam, being Muslim. I can still see myself, imagine myself a year and a half ago, if I were to walk into the back of this hall and to see myself standing in an abaya, in a hijab. I know what I'd say. I'd take one look at myself and I'd say, no way. Because I can assure you that there was no way that I was ever going to be a Muslim, and I was certainly never going to wear hijab. But we plan, they plan, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best planner of all. And so today, if you'll let me, I would like to take you on my personal journey to Islam and explain to you how a journalist in a time when Islam is painted as a terror organization rather than a true religion of faith and submission to the one God, how a journalist, political journalist from a political family, comes to be standing here as a humble slave to Allah and as your sister. I was born in, I'm not going to give you the year actually. That was a silly thing to say. Let's just say I was a child in the 70s in London and leave it at that. My father was Catholic originally, although he had his belief pretty much pounded out of him by some nuns who were very handy with sticks and other implements at the schools in Liverpool in the 70s. My mother was what you might call a superstitious Christian, so she wouldn't ever go to church, but she would hang crosses around the house to ward off evil spirits. Now, when I was a child, I don't remember anyone teaching me to pray. But before even my grandmother had talked to me about prayer, I remember speaking to God as a child. Because it made sense to me that in my household, my mother gave rules, and my father gave rules, and God gave rules to them. And that was inherent in myself. And I remember praying as a child. They're very innocent, the prayers of children. I remember, for example, at about the age of 7, saying, "Dear God, please take my younger sister away." Not for a very long time, just for 48 hours, just for a couple of days. You can bring her back. I also remember I was in a thing called the Brownies, which is like a girls' group where you do activities. And one year, one Easter, I was allowed to carry the Brownies flag up to the altar in the church. And it was a big honour. Now, all the other girls, when they went up to the cross, which was supposed to be the symbol of God, I knew God was in this house. That's all I knew. What they do is they just kind of bob their heads, and then they turn their backs and kind of saunter away, you know, the way bored kids do. But when I went up to the cross, I did this, and I backed away. I'd seen that done in films about Henry VIII. And I remembered watching the people in the court go up to the king, and they would bow and shuffle and go backwards like this, and I thought, God's way better than King Henry VIII. You don't just turn your back. So I did this very long shuffle backwards. Everybody in the church was laughing, all the girls were tittering, and my parents were crying. And when I came out, they hugged me. These two people who would never go to church, and they said, "You really get how enormous God is." What innocence from a child. But that was about it as far as God went when I was a child. The only thing I knew about Islam when I was young was gleaned, I ascertained by watching the girls in my school. There were 3 Muslim girls in my school. And over a period of 8 or 9 years, I watched them, and I learned 3 things that I thought were true about Islam. The first was that Muslim girls all have long hair. And the second thing was that all Muslim girls are really good at maths, and they're all going to be doctors or dentists. And the third thing was that Muslim girls don't date boys. And that was all I knew about Islam until 9/11. Now, I'd be harder on myself if that wasn't the case with just about everybody else I know in the UK. But you know, when you're coming to Islam, when Allah has a plan for you, and you're asked to look back from inside the Ummah, you start to see little moments of awakening that were on your path. And so I can note that my first real moment of sensing I didn't know much about the world was in 2005. 2000. There were some photographs that stopped the world, that changed the way we see things. One of those photographs was of a young girl during the Vietnam War. She is running from a burning village, and she has napalm on her back, and her clothes have been burnt off her body, and she's screaming. Can you see that image in your head? Well, another image came onto my TV screens in 2000. It was on the BBC News. And it was of a young boy, 15 years old, and he had a stone in his right hand. And he was standing very straight and very brave and very proud, and not in the least afraid, which was incredible because just 10 feet from him was a tank, and the tank was pointing its gun at him. And that boy's name was Faris Odeh. Have you heard of Faris Odeh?
Yes.
I'm glad you have, brother. But for those who haven't, Faris Odeh was from Rafah refugee camp in Gaza. And he went out to throw stones at the tanks that were coming to harm his family and all the families around. And when I saw that image on my television screen, the voiceover didn't make sense. Because the voiceover seemed to be saying, look at that terrible Arab ragamuffin, that Muslim danger to the rest of the world. And look at that lovely Israeli tank protecting us all. Thank goodness for Israel. The voice did not match the image. 10 days after that picture appeared on the news screens around the world, Faris Odeh was killed. He was shot dead by an Israeli sniper. A bullet went through his neck. That's probably why in 2005 I found myself saying some incredible words to my editor at the Mail on Sunday. I stood in his office and I said, Peter, I'd like to go to Palestine, please. Now, there was no reason at all why an editor would send me to Palestine, unless perhaps he was trying to get rid of me. At the time, in 2005, I was writing mostly lifestyle pieces about being a mother, working mother, visiting France, selling homes, that sort of thing, and some occasional pieces on British politics, but I'd never written anything about the Middle East. So it was amazing that my editor said, go for 10 days to Palestine. And in January 2005, I found myself standing at Tel Aviv airport without my luggage. The Israelis had taken it for extra security. They're very good at security, you might have heard. So I was standing at Tel Aviv airport, and I just got into the first cab that I saw. And the driver of that taxi came up to me and he said, "My name's Jamal, you can call me Jimmy." I said, "Hello, Jimmy. I want to go to Ramallah." He said, "No problem. By the way, I do accents. You're going to have to forgive me, inshallah. It's not meant to insult, but I come from an acting family. It's more of a loving tribute. They do come out." So I got into Jamal's taxi, and between Tel Aviv airport and Ramallah, Columbia checkpoint, he gave me Occupation 101. He tried to fill me in 60 years of Palestinian history and Israeli occupation. I remember at one point, after we got past Al-Quds, we were nearing Columbia checkpoint, the road got bad, and on the lovely hills above, there was a beautiful road and nobody was on it. Sort of like one of your toll roads. I said to Jimmy, I said, "Why don't we use that road up there? I don't want to tell you your job, but it would take us to the same place." He said, "You don't know much about this, do you?" I said, "Explain to me." He said, "That road up there is for Jews only. If I take you up there, we will be shot dead within minutes. And the joke is on me because being from Jerusalem, I pay for those roads that I can't use." I was outraged. It was getting dark when we arrived at Columbia, and at that point Jamal said, "I'm going to drop you here, you have to walk through now, and you'll get a taxi the other side." I said, "Please don't leave me, I've never been to the West Bank." He said, "I can't go to the West Bank." I said, "But you're Palestinian." He said, "You don't know much about this, do you? Are you sure you should be going?" I said, "Explain to me." He said, "Israel has given me a card that says I live this side of the line and my Palestinian brothers and sisters live that side, so I can't go to the West Bank or to Gaza ever." That night, when I got to my hotel room, I cried myself to sleep because one other thing had happened. I'd had my first encounter with an Israeli soldier. A young kid, about 19 years old, from Brooklyn, Israel. Did you know that? Yeah. It's amazing. I don't quite know how bits of New York end up in Israel, but they do. So this American in an Israeli uniform swung his gun towards Jamal's face and said to me, "Give me your passport." And he looked at my passport and he said, "Britain, we love you guys." And that night I cried myself to sleep because I realized I didn't really know what the world was about at all. And that just possibly everything I'd been told about these people with their strange customs and their oddly named God and their women in headdresses, perhaps it was all wrong. The next day, I was going to interview Mahmoud Abbas because it was the Palestinian elections. And I found myself in a very big elevator with two of Abbas's personal bodyguards. Two of the biggest Arab men you can imagine. 6'5", black uniforms, big guns. As they pulled the wire door and closed me with them into the lift, I started to feel a bit scared. One of the walkie-talkies went off, and one of the giant men said something that sounded like, and in my mind, I thought, subtitle, "We'll kill the white woman later." It was a really, really bad time to realize that I had Arabophobia. Yes, as liberal as I thought I was, somehow I had swallowed all of the Western narrative. about these men with guns who speak Arabic really loudly. What is with the volume control in Arabic, by the way? How come you can say, "That's it, everything's going wrong, and happy birthday to you"? The same volume. Anyway, it's just... So I realized I had Arabophobia, but you know what? Palestine is a magical place. And 72 hours later, I realized that I would have given my life for any of the sisters and any of the families that I met there. I'll give you an example of something that happened to me on that first trip. I didn't have my coat because the Israelis had kept my bags. And one night I was walking down a main road in Ramallah, and a tiny Palestinian woman ran up to me, grabbed me by the sleeve, and said, "Yalla, yalla, yalla." And she took me into a little house, threw open a wardrobe door, looked at me up and down, and started throwing things into a case and put a coat on me, wrote down her phone number and shoved me out the door. She gave me clothes because she didn't want to see a stranger being cold in her land. That's all. On that first trip I went to Gaza very briefly, and on the way back, like all the other people at Erez checkpoint, I was kept for 12 hours. One old lady in a wheelchair was taken across the checkpoint and brought back 3 times, crying. She missed her plane to America. She was due to have an operation. She came over to me and cried in Arabic, "I'm not a terrorist, why are they doing this to us?" When I finally got through the checkpoint, because some of the Palestinian minister for aviation was there, and transport, they'd been kept and humiliated for 12 hours. When we finally got through, I was so traumatized by the searching and the bag checks, and it's a frightening place. I called Jamal in the morning, at 9 in the morning, and said, "See you in 3 or 4 hours. When I got through, it was nearer 9 at night, and I thought, there's no way he'll be there. So when I came through shaking and I saw his car, he'd waited 12 hours for me. That's what they do. So on my journey, I was introduced to the head of the Islam channel. His name is Muhammad Ali. And Muhammad Ali, in around 2006, came to me and said, "I want you to be a presenter for the Islam channel." I said, "Okay, on 2 conditions. The first condition is, I'm not going to be a Muslim. So please don't try and convert me. I'm sure you're all very nice. In fact, I know you are, but I'm just here to work." "No problem," he said. And the second condition, I said, with due respect, is I don't want to wear hijab because I think it's hypocritical if you're not Muslim to be made to wear it. Do you understand? He said, "No problem." But you see how Allah works? First I was invited to Palestine, then I was given work, then I was put in a situation where I would meet brothers and sisters, and suddenly Islam was all around me. And because of that job with the Islam channel, I met one of this era's most remarkable men. His name is Sheikh Raed Saleh. Now who's heard of Sheikh Raed Saleh? Allahu Akbar. Sheikh Raed Saleh is the protector, the guardian of Al-Aqsa Mosque. He is the head of the Islamic movement in 48 Palestine, Israel. An incredible man. He's known as the Lion of Palestine. And when I met him one evening for an interview, he came in to the foyer of the hotel where I was staying. And he didn't look at me. He just walked in like this and said, "Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh." And he sat down in a chair opposite me and he looked at his hands. Now I wasn't Muslim at the time, and you're supposed to think if a Muslim man doesn't meet your eyes, and you're a blur, and you said the colour of my hair then, and you're a journalist, that's supposed to be rude. You're supposed to think that that shows that Muslim men hate women, that they don't want to look at us. But you know what I thought? I thought, what a lovely man. What a very polite, humble human being. And as I sat opposite him, there was a radiance about him. There was a radiance and a warmth. And I wanted to hear his voice, even though I couldn't understand what he was saying, because he only speaks Arabic. And I wrote in my diary that night, I would rather spend an hour in the company of Sheikh Raed Salah than with Johnny Depp, which, believe me, at the time was a very big deal indeed. But you know, I hadn't really had much experience of women in Islam up to that point. And getting to know the sisters is very important. So again, without my pushing, without me looking for anything particular, I got an invitation to go to Lebanon in late 2006. Now the invitation came from a political party beginning with H. Now because this is the land of the free and we're in a masjid here, I'm not going to say the name of the political Lebanese party beginning with H. Casey, if you can say it, but I couldn't possibly comment. But they invited me to see the damage that Israel had done to the cities. And so when I arrived in Beirut airport, I still expected to be met by men. Men probably in cloaks. Men probably in cloaks and turbans, looking rather sinister, perhaps going, ha ha ha. So imagine my surprise when 3 funky hijabi young women turned up with an attitude like this: ain't nobody telling me what to do. I live my life. But I'll do what my dad says because I love him. They were so sassy. They were incredible. They were highly educated. They were studying engineering and journalism and politics. And they were members of this political group. And they totally changed the way that I saw women in the hijab. And it was a lesson that I needed to have. Because when you're outside this community, you don't see the women as full, rounded human beings, as sisters. You see silent humility as something bad. Unfortunately, outside Islam, those wonderful traits, modesty, calm, quiet, studiousness, they're not respected. And you need to get close to them to understand them. So I had that experience. Now you do need to get dawah, of course, when you are being put on the path to Islam. And at this point, around 2007, 2008, sure, I liked Palestine. I ate falafel, but that just means I'm a tourist. It doesn't mean that I'm on the path to Islam. But I was getting dawah from one particular area, from Somalian taxi drivers. In North London, Somalian taxi drivers always tell you about the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You cannot get into one of their taxi cabs without them saying assalamu alaikum, even if you're not Muslim. You should really hear about our wonderful Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the time when he said, and you come away learning something. And so I looked forward to getting these taxis and meeting one of the brothers and learning about this prophet who sounded amazing. And now I've come to Islam, I get in those same taxis and the brothers have one question for me: are you married? I miss the days when they were giving me dawah, all the learning, none of that anymore. But they are amazing. And they should show us all that you can give dawah in your jobs, wherever you are. If you're feeling love for Allah, love for your faith, and if you have some knowledge, share it. People might want to hear it, and we do. Well, of course, it's time to get your first Quran when you're on the path to Islam, whether or not you know you're on the path. The Quran is put in your way. And so one day I was walking down the streets of old Al-Quds, streets of Jerusalem, and it was raining and I was about to get the plane back to the UK, and I had some shopping to do. I had about 40 minutes. I was feeling stressed. I had a list of things to get to for my husband and for my children, and suddenly a young Palestinian man fell in step next to me and said, "Salam alaikum." I said, "Wa alaikum salam." And he said, "What can I do for you today?" And you know what? Ameen thought came into my head, and I'm ashamed of it. And that thought was, I don't have time to see this guy's rugs and meet his uncles. And I stopped myself and I thought, do you know what? No Palestinian has ever treated you like that. They deserve better from you. So I slowed down and I said, "I'll tell you what, brother, I have a list of things that I need to buy, but I'm in a bit of a rush, and I'm not going to be able to drink much tea. So thank you very much for speaking to me." No. "Tell me what you need," he said. I told him my shopping list. 1 Quran in English. 1 ceremonial Arabic knife. My husband collected them. 2 stuffed camels for my daughter, and a mother-of-pearl picture of Yasser Arafat. "No problem," he said. "We'll go and get them now." We rushed in and out of shops. We did drink copious amounts of sweet mint tea. And 40 minutes later, I was standing in the rain with 2 bags with everything that I had. And I said to him, "Thank you so much. How much do I owe you?" He looked at me and said, "Please, this is from the people of Palestine. Don't forget us." I never knew his name. I never saw him again. But that is how I got my first copy of the Quran in English. But when I got home, it was time to open the Quran. So with respect, I sat down and I opened it. But I wasn't ready. You see, Allah decides when the Quran reveals itself to us, not us. And as we know, He tells us that those who come in disbelief will only have their disbelief increased by reading the Quran, if Allah has not made us ready for it. So I read Al-Fatiha and it made no sense to me at all. It just seemed to be shouting. I heard a similar voice that I recognized from the New Testament that I read, but it just didn't reach me. So I put it away on the top shelf and thought, okay, Muslims are nice people, but Islam is not for me. About 6 months later, I got the maddest email I've ever had in my life. It said just 1 sentence. 2 sentences. "Would you like to go to Gaza by boat? If you would, call this number." I looked at it and looked at it and looked at it. I knew that Gaza was under siege, that children were suffering, that the world was silent. And I thought, go to Gaza by boat, that's insane, but what a brilliant idea. So I called the number, and a voice said, "Hello, Osama here." I thought, ooh, go to Gaza with Osama. Didn't like the sound of that. Luckily it was a different Osama. And I found myself in August 2008 on a totally unseaworthy vessel with 46 other non-Muslims from around the world, mostly women. 1 nun, a lady who'd survived the Holocaust, many Christians, many secularists, people who just could not bear to think that persecution like this was happening and that no one was doing anything. So they got 2 boats together and we boarded them. We spent a month hiding from Mossad in various Cypriot and Greek islands. I haven't got the time to fill you in on all the adventures. But on the day of the crossing, it took 36 hours. Everybody was sick. Even the captain of the Free Gaza was lying on the floor. I remember the Al Jazeera journalist was lying or most of the day on the deck with a piece of toilet paper stuck to his shoe, poor guy. But every time his phone rang to tell him he had to do a live broadcast, he'd jump up and go, Al Jazeera here, in 24 hours we'll be in Gaza, blah, 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 and then he'd lie down on the deck going, I'm gonna die. You were so, so good. His name was Arash, he was very good. 36 hours that crossing was, and at one point in the night, there was me and a young girl on the deck, and a message came through that made our hair stand on end, and it was this: Free Gaza, free Gaza. This is the Israeli Navy. Turn back now, or we'll fire. Then they started to play Hebrew music to us, and I looked at the skipper, who was a woman at that point. I said, what do we do? What do we do? And she looked at me and she said, there's only one thing we can do: dance. They're playing Hebrew music for us, let's enjoy it. So we danced. And the message didn't come again. And at around midday on the 23rd of August 2008, the Irish skipper of the Free Gaza climbed the mast and said the words, land ahoy. And there was Gaza. And there were dots on the beach and dots on the port. And we had to get closer to figure out what the dots were. And as we got closer, we realized the dots were human beings. Thousands and thousands of human beings saying, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Because for more than 40 years, the Palestinians, who have no access to their airspace, nor rail space, nor international roads, nor their own borders, had looked to the seas and wondered where the rest of the world was. And on that day, 2 little boats came to them. It was the best day of my life. I spent a month in Gaza. I was only supposed to be there 5 days, but the Israelis wouldn't let me leave through Israel, and the Egyptians wouldn't let me leave through Egypt. And it was Ramadan. I wonder if I was meant to be there for the whole of Ramadan. What do you think? At one point I went to a house, not a house, a dwelling in Rafah. More like a garage space, really. And it was iftar time. And my friend and I had taken some meat from a Ham family in very poor circumstances. But the mother in this garage opened the door like this. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi. Kayf halek? She answered the door with such joy and such kindness. It was as if I was about to enter the Taj Mahal and have a feast, not sit on the floor in an empty room and eat leaves and some bread on a carpet. And I felt really angry. I felt an anger build up in me, because I didn't understand why people were fasting. It was already hard in Gaza. So I said to this mother, I said, why do you fast in Ramadan? Why does your God make you fast? There's already not enough water, there's not enough food. Why are you doing this? And she looked at me and she said, I fast to remember the poor. I fast to remember the poor. The poorest woman I'd ever met was going without food so that she could remain humble and remember other people in poverty. At that moment, it was as if a key went into my heart. And the words, if this is Islam, I'm in, came very clearly. But you know, there is a reason why Allah calls us the insan, the forgetful, because the minute I left that doorway and said goodbye to that lovely sister, I forgot that feeling. And I went back to my life. But it wasn't to be for long, because in 2010, I went to Iran as a journalist to cover Al-Quds Day, all of my experiences focus around Jerusalem and Asham. Isn't that interesting? The place of Barakah. So I was there for Al-Quds Day, when 1 million Muslims were calling for the freedom of Jerusalem. And after that, I wanted to visit a mosque. And I went to a large mosque, and I made a simple dua. I just said, Allah, because I called God Allah by this point. God didn't seem big enough a word. I said, Allah, I don't want to ask you for anything, because you've given me everything. I have a good life. But please remember Palestine. And then I sat down. And you know what month it was? It was Ramadan again. And I sat down, and I expected to watch the mothers feeding the children and to be a tourist. But when I sat down, it was as if I was sitting beneath a fountain of peace. It was as if a waterfall of absolute calm descended on me. And I couldn't move. I didn't want to move. I didn't know how to move anymore. I was not aware of my body. I was not aware of being myself. I was just aware of being a part of some incredible peace. And I knew at that moment that somewhere in the universe, it's like that all the time. I totally understood that all of the fussing, all of the worries, all of the anxieties, all of the thoughts you're all having now, none of it matters, because somewhere it's peaceful all the time. And we're making these worries. I sat there, and eventually my friend who was with me said, we should go now to our hotel. And I said, I'd like to sleep on the floor of the mosque tonight. Is that okay? She said, that's fine. In the morning, I prayed Fajr. And then I went outside, and my conscious mind freaked out. All of those thoughts that had been cleansed inside the mosque, all of that peace started to vanish. And I looked at the sky and I said, oh my God, please, not Islam. It's got to be not Islam. Why not Buddhism? Buddhism's easy. Mind you, not if you're a Shaolin monk. I didn't want it to be Islam, but I knew that that was the truth. I felt it. There was no questioning this feeling, and it became frightening to me. If you can imagine going from a secular state to knowing God exists, hell exists, heaven exists, Muhammad is the prophet, the books are true. Imagine getting all of that like that and having to cope with it. My heart was pounding, I couldn't breathe properly, I thought I was going to faint, and then a voice in my head said, you don't have to do anything. Just acknowledge you've had this feeling and go on with your life. I laughed to myself. Of course I don't have to do anything. Why am I being stupid? Just had a nice experience in a mosque. Silly me. So I got in the car with my friends and we carried on our journey, but only one thing had changed. Every 3 hours I wanted to pray so badly that I thought I'd stop breathing if I didn't pray. We were passing mosques, but of course because we were travelling, my friends were combining their prayers and I didn't understand why they weren't praying. So we'd pass a mosque and I'd say, shall we pray? Shall you pray? They looked at me and said, do you want to pray? I said, no, why don't I pray? I'm not Muslim. You know, the position I wanted to get into was with my head on the floor, and I wanted to say thank you. I wanted to thank Allah for everything. That feeling went on until finally, the next day I was in my hotel room preparing to go back to London, and I made my first prayer on my own, and it went something like this: Allahu Akbar, Subhanallah, Allahu Akbar, Subhanallah, Allahu Akbar, and I felt great afterwards. And on the way home, something else happened which was very strange. We were coming into land at Heathrow and there's that announcement, bing bong, thank you very much for flying British Airways, we hope you've had an enjoyable journey and we look forward to your custom again. At which point every Muslim woman on that flight from Tehran to London who was under 60 took off their veil. Every woman took off the hijab, shook her hair out and looked relieved. So I thought, brilliant, I'm going to take off my hijab. Thank goodness, I can take the scarf off. So I did this. My hands didn't take the scarf off. I said, okay, it's a bit strange, take the scarf off. My hands wouldn't take the scarf off. By that point, my cheeks are flushing red and I'm sure that I'm having a nervous breakdown. But I could not take the hijab off. And from that day to this, I have never been able to leave the house without the hijab. 7 days later, I went to a mosque in London and I said, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. Allahu Akbar. Takbir. I have so much more to say, but I'm aware that you have to pray in 10 minutes. So I just want to say one last thing. I was in Gaza a month ago, and if I want to leave you with one thing tonight, it's the meaning of Alhamdulillah. I met a young man called Mohammed Ajur. Mohammed Ajur is 23 years old, and I went into his home, and he is a very handsome young man, and he has a walking stick. And he told me his story. In 2009, Israel bombed his uncle's house when he was in it. 4 days later, Mohammed, who was 21 at the time, woke up in a hospital bed in Cairo from a coma. His family were in tears around him. He looked at his mother and his mother said, Habibi. And he said, Mom, why are you crying? She said, you have no legs. Habibi, you lost your legs. And Mohammed Ajur said, Alhamdulillah. She said, how can you say Alhamdulillah now? He said, because I have my 2 hands and my 2 eyes. Allah is so kind, He's left me 2 hands and 2 eyes. And when I met this young man a month ago, he had just completed his higher education in sports education. And he's looking to get married. And like all of the people I meet in Gaza, he will say Alhamdulillah for everything. So let us all tonight, when we go home and we look at our houses and we see our families and our kids who have not been hit by white phosphorus, let us all say Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair. All mistakes are mine own and all praises for Allah.